thank you for joining us today. I'm Cyndi Sullivan with Key Community Management. This has been Carb from the law office of Moretz Skufca. He's an attorney there joining us today. So thank you for being here, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk today about how to make sure contracts are what they should be for the benefit and protection of your community. So it's a topic that we work with our board members on, with the annual contracts that they engage in. So I guess maybe talk a little bit about, just introduce this topic in general.
Well, contracts are a riveting topic, of course. Everybody loves contracts, but they are very important, and boards really need to understand what they're signing. They should be familiar with the contract because, of course, it binds the association. It's a legal document. But boards should also understand some of the basic parts of a contract, and they should be aware of certain parts to look out for. Mm-hmm. So it's good that you guys educate your clients, and we also try to educate our clients as well. So there's a few things that we always want to point out. So we'll talk about those.
Okay, so our next question is regarding HOA management contracts. Would an RFP apply in that situation as well?
It would. A management contract is no different than any other contract. Of course, it's probably as or more important than almost any other contract. And I think a management company should be forthright in what the costs are, and a HOA should understand what it's paying for. We've seen a lot of contracts where there's a lot of hidden fees and it's hard to terminate. The term automatically renews. A lot of the problems that we'll talk about today, and not necessarily problems, but things to look out for. And a board should really understand the contract and all of the fees that are really involved, because it's a big time contract that the board needs to understand.
That's right. That's good. It's so important to be comparing all the bids and looking at them equally to make sure everything's exposed in the same way so they can get the full bottom line.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. So, contracts could be anything from, aside from the community manager and management company, other maintenance and improvement items like the landscaping contract, pool maintenance company, other capital improvement projects, just one-time projects that arise. So one of the things we say is that it's helpful if the board and manager create an RFP when they're getting bids for a large contract, and that helps for various reasons. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And an RFP, for anybody who's not familiar, is a request for proposals. It's basically where the HOA will sit down, usually with its manager, sometimes also with an engineer or a general contractor, and they'll come up with a scope of work for a large-scale project. It could be something like landscaping or even lawn care, but often it's for a roof replacement or a new building, things that are big ticket items. And they'll come up with a scope of work, and then it'll be distributed to general contractors or engineers, companies who are equipped to do this work, and they will be asked to submit their proposal along with whatever price they'll charge for it, and they'll give a timeline usually, and it allows the board to compare different vendors who usually don't know who their competitors are, and it gets you theoretically an accurate price, a competitive market price, and it allows the board to tailor the contract to what their specific needs are so they can really compare apples to apples. So I think they're a very good idea for big projects. They're not always feasible for smaller ones, but it's a very good way to get a competitive pricing out there and get a feel for what different vendors are offering.
That's good. Another thing is that it saves time, because we've sat with boards before where they're trying to compare bids and to see if they're all offering the same thing. And so it puts them in a place of maybe being a little bit unclear on what's being offered. So if we start on the front end to submit what we're looking for, then this makes it easier all around.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So are there some things that boards should look for? Maybe just to be protected and that kind of thing. What are some things they would want to look for in their contracts?
Well, every contract should have a few basic items, and it's actually shocking how many contracts don't have all of these basic items. But The real basic terms that every board needs to be aware of are really the fundamental parts of a contract. First, the price. It needs to have a clear price. If you have to pull a calculator to figure out how much it costs, that's probably not very clear.
Yeah.
Another item you want to look out for is the term of the contract. It should probably have a specific start and stop date or a way to terminate the contract. There should also be very clear guidance about what is being purchased with the contract. It is surprising how few contracts really specify what work is being done. Sometimes a landscaping contract, for example, will say all of the common areas. Well, that doesn't really describe what we're talking about, especially if there really are not a lot of common areas, or if there are areas that may not even be part of the common areas, but the board is unclear about what they're really buying. So those are some terms that every contract should have. We also like to see what happens if there's been a default.
Yes.
A contract should say if there's been a problem, what happens. Usually there's a minimum cure period, 10 days to 30 days, where the board will send written notice, and if the contractor does not fix the problem, then the board can terminate the contract. So
That's important.
yeah, so those are some basic things to look out for in all contracts.
Okay, that's good. So what about some specific clauses, keeping in mind that board members are not legally minded, but maybe just some things that they might be able to identify on their own?
Yes, there are a lot of provisions that we keep an eye out for, but there's probably a handful that are ones that are really problematic that we can point out and boards should keep an eye out for. The first of which is basically an automatic renewal provision. A lot of contracts will say that if it's not terminated within, say, 60 days from the last day of the term, it will automatically renew for another year. And boards oftentimes don't realize that, and then they're stuck with a contractor they don't like for another year, and that can be a problem. There are also contracts along the same vein that will have termination penalties built in, so that if the board tries to terminate, the contractor gets paid a significant amount of money. And while those are not all bad, and sometimes they have legitimate purposes, it can really burn a board and an HOA if they're not aware of those on the front end.
Yes.
And sort of similarly are contracts that are difficult to terminate.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll see one with a 90-day termination period. We saw one recently with a termination period that the board had to give 100 business days notice to terminate, which if you think about it, that's probably 2/3 of a year. So the board was a little surprised when we pointed that out to them. So
Right.
those are the kind of provisions that we like to look out for.
Wow. And that's a great area. I mean, you'd have to get the calendar out and count business days for that one.
I'm glad we pointed that one out.
Wow. And sometimes it's about what is the contractor trying to get away with, and maybe what we recommend is having an attorney, such as you or someone from your office, review all potential contracts, or say if the board has narrowed it down to one that they like the best, have your office review it, because there might be a word that changes the meaning of something we don't know, or just some different provisions that might be left out. So that's really helpful.
Right, and we don't need to necessarily review every contract, but certainly some of the bigger ones. But it's also possible to create an addendum to a contract, just kind of standard terms and conditions that the HOA should insist on for every contract. So that's also a possibility too.
That's a great idea, right? And so that would be in place even as board members change, sort of as a policy that they have. That's good. So let's talk a little bit about HOAs that are sort of inheriting contracts that were initiated by the developer. So are there any special rules that might apply, if there's a transition there?
There are actually. Our statutes have a provision that says a community that has just turned over from developer control to member control, there are provisions that allow the HOA to terminate contracts that were entered into by the developer but that carry over into the control period when homeowners take over. And it's not so easy to just terminate a contract, but if the board can show that a contract is not bona fide or was unconscionable at the time it was entered into, then the board can give 90 days notice and terminate a contract no matter what, without penalty. So that's something that is always a tool in the toolbox. Hopefully we don't have to use it, but it exists.
Yes, wow. Well, that's great. And I would guess if that comes up, the board would consult with their legal counsel, try to take the right steps to move forward.
Yep, and you really should consult with your attorney, because those are kind of tricky to get right. It doesn't happen much, but we have had to do it a few times, and it can be a powerful tool to help a community out.
Yes. Well, you know what? We like smart people, like attorneys around. We keep Ben around. So thank you, Ben, for your insight. We appreciate you guys tuning in today. Until next time, we're here helping make your community successful.